Would you like to win a free copy of the instant hit novel The Perishing by Natasha Dione? Just leave a review of the Make That Paper podcast on Apple Podcasts or podchaser.com. Post a screenshot of your review on Instagram and tag the show at make_that_paper_podcast. We will randomly select a winner and announce them on the show on Wednesday, November 17th.
Welcome to Make That Paper, the show where we talk about all the crazy jobs we do to make the cash we need to pursue our artistic dreams.
And to stay in an Airbnb when the contractors run a little behind schedule.
Oof. Today we are talking about that teaching trade and the editing enterprise and also the old writing retreat role.
Yes, and we're getting into the insurance company concern while also dabbling in the music métier.
Oh, yeah. We are your hosts, Jamie Parker Stickle
and Jason Bieber.
And in this episode, we are talking to a literary power couple. She is the author of the most talked about memoir of the year, Blow Your House Down, and has published 4 novels, including Life and Men, which is now under development as a series on Netflix.
He wrote the breakout memoir Liar, as well as several hit novels, including The Cost of Living. And we are so lucky to have them join us on today's show.
Please welcome the brilliant Gina Frangello.
And the equally brilliant, though not quite as cited, Rob Roberge.
Yay!
Bravo.
Thank you so much for joining us, you guys.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'm glad we made them laugh.
Yes, yes. That's our lubricant for the show.
Yeah.
Done. We have like other lubricants.
You had us at the Airbnb.
We thought you might enjoy that.
I know that was rough for you guys.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
This isn't contractor hour with Rob and Gina.
Yeah, we don't get to perform our impromptu songs about our contractor.
We have time for it. We'll make time for that.
Yeah, we can add on to it. We can pile on because our new place in a little north of LA, Northern California, is like our contractors just left and said the job is done. And we went up there and there was like blood on the sheets and the floor and the dryer and the washing machine was filled with like 50 gallons of water when we opened it. It just flooded the house. And we were like, you guys, what's done? And there's like no molding on the ceiling anymore. And
I'm still at the blood.
Oh, there's blood all over the sheets. I was like,
Jamie's really good at leading with the climax.
Yeah. Who murdered who in this room?
It's a little matter of your house now being a crime scene.
It was
okay.
Well, that's
freaky.
When we got into the Airbnb game, we knew that was going to be part and parcel for
it.
Yeah.
It's a cautionary tale for us.
Yeah. We've dealt with blood a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
P.S.
You know, we just bought that little container house,
which is adorable.
Oh, thank you. We're
and
so
plumbing.
excited.
That's awesome that it has plumbing.
It's what?
That you have, it's got a toilet and a shower and it's got everything.
We're so excited about it. So we're probably going to be joining the Airbnb game and soon there shall be blood in our house too.
Yep. So, just get a maid.
Well, someone else's.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it? What do you mean a container, like a cargo shipping container?
Yeah. That's converted.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
I didn't show you the pictures of it.
And it comes, no,
you're not on Facebook.
No, I'm living the life. But
wow.
So they just like they showed up one day with a truck and just dropped off your house?
Well, after the day of grading 20 feet and making it level and putting a foundation down and then getting yelled at by the guy putting the thing down that you didn't put the foundation down, right. City boy. And,
and Rob's like, they might not be able to drop it down. And, but they did.
I didn't sound quite as hysterically childlike.
Well, when somebody calls me city boy, I definitely go into childhood hysterics.
Yeah. Speaking of them getting into the Airbnb business as artists, which is a wonderful artist transition and passive income. Passive. It's not passive.
Hey, that's what the IRS calls it.
Right. Passive income. Let's talk about you guys starting out because I'm going to start with Gina just really quick because I just, it's still talk about Blow Your House Down as everyone is still talking about it. I think we're all probably going to read it 2 or 3 times, but you talk about a lot of jobs that you did. And I think that it's incredible, though, your steadfastness and wanting to be a published writer the whole time, because a lot of the jobs you did weren't equal to being a writer.
True.
Yeah. So let's go back, because you always did want to be a writer.
Yeah, I've been writing since I was 4 years old. I started writing my first novel when I was 10. I like ripped off butcher block paper that my mom used to buy because I went through too much paper and we were super poor. So I've always written, but I didn't major in it in college. I majored in psychology because we were below the poverty line and my parents were not going to have any security and I was going to have a bunch of loans to pay back. And so I was like, what am I supposed to do with this writing degree? The only writer I had ever met was the guy who lived in our garage when I was growing up.
It's amazing.
I guess that kind of says it all.
That was an Airbnb early on edition.
So yeah, he had never published anything. Actually, There was another one who was a PI who went to a bar my dad used to own. And he was writing a series of novels about the Russians taking over the United States by infiltrating all the McDonald's. But he never got published either. So those were my two models of like how much money I was going to have if I
McDonald's, social media.
But I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I sort of want to get into this conspiracy theory now. Listen, I have had side hustles too. And people will be like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a writer and an actor. And they're like, oh, let me give you my book. You should read my book. And I'm like, okay, but I'm not published or anything. Let me give you my book. And it's like a box of notebooks of conspiracy theory. And I'm like, where does it start and where does it end? And
that's the beauty.
The great thing about this guy is he's actually turned into like one of my biggest examples in my teaching, because the reason he didn't get published, even though his idea was sort of killer, was that he'd be like, Logan opened the car door by using his right thumb to depress the door handle, hooking the rest of his fingers underneath the lever and pulling forward with his right foot. He stepped into the car and you'd be like, oh my motherfucking God, so like I tell my students, like, everyone tells you to use your senses and use physical detail, but like there is such a thing as overdoing it. So
right.
I was at that fence and then the car exploded. What was the essential information we just gave the reader? We took a little while getting to the bottom.
It's so interesting because I never thought that I would appreciate brevity more than when I read something that's overwritten. Like when somebody is like, oh, it's an 1,100 page book. And I'm like, wow, I don't have the time. I'm like not even going to start reading that. I'm sorry. Like,
well,
honestly.
It's like, we appreciate mortality more when a Merchant Ivory film is on. we feel it. We feel it coming toward us in a way it normally isn't.
I should have some kind of like a bet pool going before all things to see whether Rob can get like a dig at Merchant Ivory into the conversation.
Or something anti-Anglophile at some point.
I'm really just glad that you're here now, Rob. Just for that line alone. Just for that.
I can go. We can leave.
Just for that. I am so like, that's
Yeah, you may have just made the commercial cut for the episode. So there you go.
Yeah, that was awesome. I'm so happy. Okay, so psychology, and I know that when you were on the East Coast, you were actually practicing in a social worker position or in a role.
Yeah, I worked at what was then called a Battered Women's Agency, which was an internship while I was getting my master's in counseling psychology. I saw private clients. I ran the domestic violence group on Monday evenings, at which we often got bomb threats and like calls that would say things like, I know what that bitch's car looks like and I'm going to kill her, and so that I also would take women for restraining orders and to sort of get their WIC things and so sort of a full service thing. And then I also the next year I helped open a women's wellness center at a hospital in a prison town. And then for the next 2 years, or maybe like a year and a half, I was also a private contractor at a foster care agency where I worked with primarily adolescent, like teen foster girls, which was amazing work, very harrowing. And, and I was doing all this work basically between the ages of 22 and 25. So 23 and 25, something like that. And so I had really not, I had not processed a lot of the violence in my own neighborhood of origin. And I left pretty ready for a break, and I went to go get my master's in English and in the program for writers at UIC, and thought I would just go back to being a therapist, but I ended up getting so caught up in the literary world that I never went back.
That's interesting, because you said that even from age 4 and then age 10 you were writing your first novel, so you already had the goal of being a writer in your crosshairs. But then this we'll call it a side job, but this work that you were doing in working in the, and you said what was then called a battered women's shelter, and I'm not sure what the right term is now, but in these
domestic violence housing, usually.
Yeah.
DV housing.
More common now, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll use the blanket term of this humanitarian work that you were doing was so important to you. I think that it actually almost changed the course of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, so it's really interesting. Like, I hear a lot from my students, of course, because I teach at university and MFA level, like the goal of being a writer. Like I didn't write with any concept that I was ever going to be published. I had no actual aspirations of being published. I wrote because it was how I thought. It was how I processed the world. It was just a thing I did. I hid my writing from everyone in my neighborhood. It was something that would have been kind of laughed at. Only my mother knew that I did it. I didn't confess to anyone that I had been writing novels until I started college. So it was interesting. I finally started to think maybe I'll publish something someday, when I was taking elective creative writing classes in college, and my professors, I studied with Lori Moore, I studied with Ann Packer, and people said, you should send your stories out. And I finally did, right when I had gotten out of college, send one story out, and it got published. And that was really the beginning. I was in my 20s before I ever thought be a writer. Writing was just like, it was what I was, but I didn't think of it as a career at all, and had no goals of that type. So, but yeah, I definitely, I wanted to be in the helping professions, and that has continued in my life in the literary world. I've worked in nonprofits as an editor for as long as I've been in the literary world. So, I went back to get my master's, and within a year I was working at a literary magazine that I eventually took over and launched a press out of. I was working then, running the fiction section of the Nervous Breakdown. I was the Sunday editor of the Rumpus. I, of course, was at the Coachella Review with you. And now I work at the Los Angeles Review of Books as the creative nonfiction editor. So I've always had a literary citizenship component to my literary identity, like where I'm able to champion and publish other writers. And I briefly, like the time that I was doing the Coachella Review, where I was just faculty editor, so I wasn't making those actual, like really in the trenches decisions, I was just kind of supervising, was the most distant I've ever been from it, because I was in the throes of really like trying to find my footing with full-time work again.
Yeah.
And I missed it so badly.
Do we have any commercials today?
Let's take a quick break and see. You know what I bet our listeners are thinking right now?
What's that, Bieber?
They're probably thinking, this podcast thing is so easy. I could start my own podcast. And you know what? They're right.
Yeah, we've been using Anchor for a few months now, and it has totally changed our game. Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain.
It's free!
I said, let me explain.
Fine.
There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much anywhere podcasts are streamed.
You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. I mean, it's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place.
And it's free.
Yes. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And we're back.
It's a whole other side topic that, that these jobs do not pay. And
I was just going to say, let's talk about why you cobbled together so many pieces, because some of them didn't pay.
None of them pay.
Right.
I mean,
like I'm an editor on a lit blog, and I'm like, do you guys know I'm volunteering my time? So like, I actually have to work a real job and edit my novel for my agent. Like, I love doing it though. Like, you love supporting other writers and reading the work, and putting it out there feels good, but it doesn't pay.
Coachella Review came with a stipend of
which
very
was pennies
tiny stipend. And that was literally the most I ever made at any of these jobs that I've been doing since 1995 or 96. And, so it's a complex situation. Like, now I am doing it in addition to more than full-time other work. But most of the people who do this work are people who can somehow afford to do this work. And so that is a problem in the industry, not just because we don't get paid, which is itself a problem, but also because people who really don't have an hour to spare, are really not able to get by if they're donating their time to being kind of like a literary arbiter of some kind, or a philanthropist in the literary world. Like, it essentially means you're only drawing from people who have some other form of stable employment, some other form of spousal support, or family money. And that is a ripple effect problem in the entire literary world.
Which is also why I think that people come to it later in life. Not because they didn't always want to do it, but it's like when you read that somebody isn't published for the first time till they're 45 or 50 or whatever, it's because we had to work jobs and we didn't have the time to just be a full-time writer.
Fully true. Yeah.
Which is why I want to talk to Rob, because he had a similar track to you in terms of timing. Like, you went to MFA also, and you went in your, did I read in your bio that you went in your 20s for your MFA as well? Or did you come later?
In my late 20s, but prior to 18, our experiences are pretty radically different, because
let's hear about it.
You grew up on a yacht, didn't you?
Let's hear about it.
Yeah. And
he was yachting for a living.
My father was so powerful, he would shoot men while pheasant hunting, and they would apologize to him the next day in the press.
Are you watching Squid Games?
I don't even know what Squid Games is.
Don't. I can't recommend it less.
Son of the Cheney Empire. No, I'm from a middle-class family. My mom was at the time a school nurse, and my pops was a narcotics agent in Connecticut.
Wow.
I made him very proud over the years.
Sure.
Wow.
We explored the same field from different approaches.
It was like The Wire took place just in your house.
Wow.
It's right. Like Dee
so
and
excited
McNulty,
right now.
Except Dee and McNulty liked each other better, but that.
Yeah.
But no, I actually got to college, and people think I'm exaggerating or being hyperbolic, or I got to college and I did not know there were living writers. I thought everything had been written by the bunch of dead white guys we studied in high school. And that was it. That was plenty. Who could read all that?
Yeah.
And I thought actors on TV just talked to each other. They were very good at it. That's why they got paid.
Mm-hmm.
I never really, I wouldn't have thought it through that far, actually.
Were you not a reader when you were young? Were you read because you had to, but not like?
I remember
which is okay.
I don't remember reading much at all. I remember being very moved by Flowers for Algernon and The Incredible Shrinking Man, which has an ending that I never want to read again, because as I recall it, it was the greatest sort of existential yet Buddhist at one with everything ending I've ever read. And I'm sure maybe it's that good, but I don't want to know, because in my memory, it was the greatest ending I'd ever read. But no, I didn't. I was in bands. Yeah, that's what I was. I was a classic suburban middle class kid who thought that a life's goal was to be a rock star, and the fallback was to be an indie rock star.
Solid score.
I mean, I'm not going to say that wasn't the goal.
But then I got to college, and we had to name a major, and I named musical theater because I'd been in a pit band, and I had no idea what I'd major in because I slept through or nodded through or, was in the bathroom with hangovers during most of high school. So I named pit band because there was a band involved. Right. And then all of a sudden I was singing at people my first semester of college in tight clothing and thinking, what the fuck just happened to my life?
Yeah.
You're talking to a musical theater pro here.
You're
so
talking to
I
him. And then
slightly mortified right now because you actually got on stage and were actually doing it in tight clothes and not knowing what you were doing.
Well,
and so many others are like, well, I just want that. I want that. I declared it as
my first class was acting and movement at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I showed up.
I had that class.
In a cigarette, and I'm wearing my clothes. And she's like, "Where are your clothes?" And I'm like, "These are my clothes." And she tells me I can't smoke or drink coffee. And I'm like, I am in the wrong damn major. I don't know where I belong. But anyway.
That's ridiculous because
everyone can smoke.
Everyone smokes and drinks coffee, and usually it's sports in theater.
Had a carton in her mouth.
What school did you go to? This is absurd.
Emerson. But no, so I didn't know there were really writers till I was catering a reading where Bill Knott and Richard Yates were reading. Bill Knott, the wonderful poet, and Richard Yates,
you were catering?
I was catering it. And that was also when I first learned that you could eat broccoli without it being brown and mooky.
I beg to disagree.
I was waiting for him to say covered in Velveeta cheese.
We didn't have books or vegetables in my house. So
where did you grow up?
Catering crudité at a reading was just like going to the moon, and I loved it. So
did you get hired by a catering company? You were a server?
Yeah. I didn't have a business. I'm not an entrepreneur.
Right, no. And this was in college. So you were catering in college. You went to a reading serving broccoli, and you were like, oh, I could be a writer. I've got things to say.
I don't know. I thought, my God, it's amazing. People who are alive do shit this amazing. And it changed my life.
I love that.
And I learned you could eat broccoli. I mean, it was a 180.
It was certainly a turning point.
No, it truly was. I mean, not to make light of it, like hearing Bill Knott, Richard Yates was one of my favorite writers of all time. And at the time, probably I had just discovered there were writers, and then I found out he was reading, and then I saw him, and it was just like, I mean, it was a sea change to a degree that I really can't even probably articulate. Trying to be more serious about it. It was like the first time I heard the Clash. It was like, oh my God, there's a world I did not know existed, and I want to be part of that world. There are those moments in art where that happens.
Yeah.
And I just didn't even know there was a place, and then all of a sudden, there was the possibility of an enormous place, and it was all new, and it was wonderful.
Did you go and change your major the next day, or like what was the next step towards that?
Right around then, probably. I mean, I had, Gina's heard this too many times, so I'll do it really quickly. But I had a crush on this one woman who was in music theater, and she transferred to tech theater. And I thought, well, the better she what?
You just went on over too. You followed her.
I was trying to do this quickly, so. Yeah.
So you followed her.
I just thought that the longer she was exposed to me, the more she would realize what a sensitive, wonderful person I was, and we would ultimately end up together and have little artistic children, I guess. No, I never wanted children. But anyway, not to go down that road, but I followed her through like 4 majors till I got to journalism, and I thought I kind of like writing. But I made stuff up, and the editor at the paper said, you're not allowed to make stuff up. We're going to put you on op-eds because you're very opinionated, but you don't do transcriptions. And I loved that. And I loved that. And that was great training for a writer, because you think you're being funny, and then people pick at you, and you think you're being like cutting edge Woodward and Bernstein, and they go, oh, that was really cute. And you realize you have less control over an audience than you thought you did. And then I hit fiction, and I had fallen in love with it.
That's awesome. So when you left school and you want to be a fiction writer, where did that take you? Like, what were you working? What were you doing?
Within 500 feet of.
Sure.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. As she moved
knew a
on to
boy
her
that did
fifth and
that.
final.
That's not true. And
major.
that's actually a real person, and that's not true.
No, let me tell you.
Rob has a restraining order from 1986.
No. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I actually knew a boy that did the same thing. He and I were in theater together, and I think his name was actually Rob. But this is in Michigan. No, we had our first, what's the class you have to take after 101 where you build sets? Okay. So 102 is like, you have to build mock sets. Okay. And anyways, he fell in love with an upperclassman who was in theater too. And he did the same thing. He followed her. But let me tell you what happened with them. They got married. And I was like, ew, gross.
Because you're from Michigan.
Because I'm from Michigan. And I was like, ew, gross. And I got in a car and drove all the way to California. Because I was like, what? And then their careers were over. They became like, one became like an elementary school teacher and the other one stayed home and had 5 kids. I was like, what is this? This is terrible. That's not what this was about. I shouldn't say that because I'm going to alienate a lot of people. But for me, that was terrible. That's not the dream when you go, I want to be an actor. I want to be a writer. I want to be a journalist. You go do and be those things. Mm-hmm. You don't just pretend it in college and then do something else completely. Well, that's what I thought.
I just didn't know they existed. So in that regard, college was a real gift for me.
But then Rob's had 97 jobs.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
He drove a Zamboni for a day.
No.
Were you
Zamboni is
Craigslisting
actually
them?
like Kleenex. It's a brand name. I drove a ice cleaning machine that was not in fact a Zamboni machine, but did the same effect as a Zamboni machine.
But was it as effective as the Zamboni?
I think that company would like you to believe it was every bit as effective, if not an improvement on the Zamboni technology.
Then how come you only lasted one day on the job?
Well, like every good machine, it depends who's using it.
The Buffalo Parks Department lost the contract to the Zamboni company.
All right, let's talk about some of your 97 jobs because Jason always thinks it's funny that I've had 97 jobs.
It's actually not, I'm sorry. It really is. I believe I came out between 48 and 51.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. I mean, there is an actual count somewhere in there.
Yeah.
48 and 51 jobs.
Something like that.
A lot of physical labor and a lot of restaurant industry.
And a near equal amount of roommates.
We both have done a lot of service industry work, and but Rob also painted houses.
Oh God, I did that too.
Yeah,
which it's really funny whenever you do a bio for a book or a publication. Like my first publication after 7 years of rejection. I don't know why I kept doing it. I guess that was when I realized I was a writer. But no, when I realized I was a writer I wrote a 3-page short story 6 months after I graduated from having an MFA. And I thought, why the hell did I do that? There's not a professor who wants that. There's no one on earth who is interested in what I have just done. It must be what I do because there's no reason to be doing this. Yeah. And that was a sort of epiphanal moment, but
involuntary writing.
Yeah. It's well, I guess I do this,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We'll be right back. Tell us some of your service industry jobs. I picture Gina and Rob on a date going, oh, really? I can top that. I did this. And this person said this.
We're both far more invested in what interests us, like most human beings, except we're pretty open about it, over what might interest someone else for their money. So I don't know. Most of my gigs, though, were just great for fiction. And I think, on a craft side, most people don't write enough about jobs as far as I'm concerned. And for a lot of my life, it was well over a third of the hours that I put in in Earth. It was the source of probably a good 80% of my resentments. It fueled much of my behavior, fueled in resentment into, drug-fueled escapades to escape from the crummy life I was going back to at 8 o'clock the next morning. So, I mean, I think it shaped a psyche, not just an aesthetic of life, but as a writer, I got to know a lot of people. I mean, I've gotten to work on a garbage truck, where the guy before me backed it in wrong. And it's like a tube of toothpaste at the compactors at the restaurants and the supermarkets, where when you squeeze all the fish and the goo out and into the compactor, if it's bent wrong, it's like a hole in a tube of toothpaste.
Oh, yeah.
Someone like me works for a mobster and has to go shovel maggot fish heads into a
gonna
bucket.
bring up the maggots. I was gonna say, like, talk about maggots.
So I shoveled maggot food waste for a summer. And then the guy I rode the truck with in the mornings, not every day, and I made him have to get me a coffee eventually, but he would stop and he would fuck his niece in the basement of the house on the way to work. He would stop at 6:30 and say, I'll be right back. And it turned out he was fucking maybe his cousin. Maybe it was nicer than that. I'll say cousin.
Cousin.
It can be consensually disturbing. But he eventually, I made him
sitting in the car.
I eventually made him at least get me a coffee while we waited.
And then that's fair compensation.
And then the maggots lay ahead on the day. That was one gig. There were a lot. But I was an industrial painter, and the thing about bios in publishing, like the first publication I had, the guy says, "Okay, well, tell me about yourself." And I said, "Well, I just got an MFA in writing from Vermont College." He's like, "Oh, that's interesting. We're not going to use that." I'm like, well, I'm really interested in narrative theory. I study narrative theory. I dropped out of a PhD program, but I was studying modernism and narrative theory. He's like, "Oh, that's fascinating." I was like, and he's like, "Well, what have you done for a living?" I was like, "Well, to pay for grad school, I was an industrial painter." He's like, "What was that?"
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I painted airline hangars, and you use magnetic paint because paint that falls onto ocean machines destroys the robotics. So you have to use magnetic paint so it sucks up to the roof and all this. And he's like, "Oh, okay." So my first publication is Rob Roberge lives in Buffalo, New York. He's an industrial painter.
Wow.
This is part of, I want to asterisk. This is part of like
every male
writer in America.
But it's not our fault.
He has been on a shipping boat in Alaska as a fisherman. Like, this is literally like the bio of every freaking male writer in this country. Like,
for females, they don't want to know that. They're like, no.
I was going to ask you, Gina, like, do they ever express any interest in what you've done other than writing when writing your bios?
No.
To the point of suppression, or just
ask you in every single like reading or interview you ever do, like what your children will think of the fact that you write about sex. So I mean that, like that's, women get that and men get the shipping in Alaska.
You should just start saying you worked on a ship.
Fishing in Alaska.
You were a king crab fisher.
I don't understand.
But then they're going to make her write about that. They're going to make her write about her love romance or some affair that she had when she was a fisherman in Alaska.
A fisherman in Alaska. But no, I mean, I've written a little bit about I worked as a maid in London, and it was at a hotel, and I had to carry like a 9,000 pound Hoover vac up and down these like narrow, crazy stairs, because it was one of those, I lived in the attic, and so it was literally like in this unair conditioned attic during a heat wave in London. And in London,
it was what, like 30 degrees?
In London, when it's 90 degrees, half the city dies because they don't understand heat. No one has air conditioning. So it's like I'm like the scullery maid in the attic carrying the Hoover. But people, it was interesting. So my dad was a bartender, and my mom was a secretary. So obviously, like, it wasn't sort of like, oh, I was slumming working blue collar jobs. It was just normal for me. But it was eye-opening, like being a maid at a hotel. You see how little regard, like my father's customers. I've been a bartender too at two different places in London and here, and people, they hit on you a lot, but they're not generally inhumane to you. Although my cousin has been like robbed while being a bartender, but when you're a maid, it's like for some reason there is fecal matter, like as if the exorcist existed in the room, like, and just the disregard for who is going to be in there cleaning up after you, like, was so above and beyond service industry because it's anonymous. Yep. And, they don't have to interact with you. They don't have to give you their order. They don't have to sit at the stool and face you after they've, apparently like thrown a piece of shit in their drink or whatever. I mean, that's the equivalent of when you're working as a maid. So, and then I wasn't in the greatest health, and I had kind of an eating disorder, and I was really small, and I eventually couldn't stand the hoisting of the Hoover, and I had to cook breakfast too, and I had like burnt all the hair off my arm in like the crazy oven where I would put the bacon, and then I had to work the reception, so it was like I was multitasking this crazy job, and finally I got.
Is this Blackadder?
I know, right? And I got a job at a pub instead, and I was like, this is going to be better. And so I quit, but I was like, hoping, of course, that I was going to get my last paycheck. And my boss was like, no. And I was like, but I worked those weeks. And she was like, well, you don't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
Wow. And it was just like, oh my God, so
she was honest.
It was, definitely like that particular job, it was like, I thought I nannied a ton. So sometimes there was a lot of disregard there, but it was like when people don't have to face you, it was sort of like my precursor to awareness of what the internet would be like. It's like, when people do not have to face you, they will do just disgusting things, because you're just you're the anonymous maid, and they don't care. They don't have any shame for their like discarded condoms on the ground or like what kind of marks are in their bed. And it's just really gross. So I did that. I did a lot of nannying work, a lot of summer girl work, and mainly really service industry and that kind of work before I went into the helping professions. And then since then, I've been in the gig economy my whole life, really. I mean, I had a full-time salaried position for 3 years as a visiting lecturer at UIC right after my divorce. And so like from 16 to 19, 2016 to 2019. But other than that, like I've never had a job that offered insurance. I've never had a job where I was paid a flat out salary rather than a by the class or by the hour or whatever. Like, so in that sense, I mean, I'm 53, but it's like, I'm still, in the hustle. I'm still in the hustle.
Can I ask
5 books? And
let me ask you a personal question about that, because I know you had breast cancer and you were divorced and you were gig economy, cobbling together, the pieces of a professional life. I mean, these are positions that are held in high esteem. There is competition up the wazoo. So if you leave, it's like, well, we've got 6,100 other applicants. So you're hanging on to that. So where were you getting your benefits? Were you paying?
So initially, I was still eligible for 18 months of COBRA, and it was wildly expensive, but I was on it. And then pretty much the reason that that the visiting lectureship at UIC saved my life in many ways was that like it allowed me to then have 3 years of secure insurance, because obviously COBRA would run out, nor could I really afford it in terms of like the cash and so forth.
It's like over $1,000 for like a single person.
It was really expensive. And so that's why I took that job. And so, as a visiting lecturer, I had been an editor for, at that point, already 20 years plus. Wow. And I'd been teaching. I taught in MFA programs, a number.
You also taught at UC Riverside for a while.
Yes, I've been teaching all over the place for 20 years. But at that position, I was pretty much only teaching comp, like first year writing. I sometimes was given something like technical writing or, just other non-creative writing, non-lit classes, because that's what they needed. And so it was not in any way like my dream job, but it was my dream job. It was like, they insured me, they gave me a salary.
Let me ask you this, because I have a lot of people who have graduated programs who are writers who are like, maybe I could be a technical writer. And I'm like white papers? Do you know how to do that? Like that is like and you're teaching it, like you have to go learn that to teach that class. Like that is a specific skill. That's not writing. It's
wild
technical.
actually. So they hired me to teach technical writing. I was hired in August because my divorce had already just gone through, and I started I think later that month.
Sure.
And so I had zero time to learn how to do technical writing.
Jesus.
I did not excel at it, Jaime.
I mean, listen, you're a wonderful teacher, so it doesn't matter.
I was tasked with for no additional pay, and this is just the reality of academia. I was tasked with reading a bunch of books on biology and the sciences to draft a syllabus to pitch to the science departments about how technical writing through the English department should be a required class for I'm in charge of this, right? And it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but nobody else has time to do it. And probably, in all honesty, not many people in the English department know how to do it.
No. So this is like engineers get this job. Like people who graduated with biology degrees get this job with no training, but they have the knowledge to be able to do it. So they buy or look at other white papers and they copy the formatting and the technical.
Well, luckily for me, I was given a fair amount of autonomy, and so technical writing in my class, had a lot to do with things like copy editing, writing ad copy, writing things like that. I mean, it wasn't probably what everyone would teach for it. Just in an editing and publishing class, some people will teach academic journals and other people will teach how to run a indie press, so it's I interpreted it in a way that would allow me not to just completely shit the bed.
Right.
I'm so glad you used that phrase before I did. the over-under on that was going this way.
Please join us next week for the continuation of our conversation with Gina Frangello and Rob Roberge.
We fought on Thursday, made up on Friday, but now I'm losing ground. You call me lazy, you think I'm crazy, so why'd you come around? She want my money, but I got no honey. This ain't no savings and loan.
Let's get back to the show.